Hello, everyone. The Gemara in Bava Kama, page 50, in context of discussing bor, ditches in the private area, in a common area, is telling us a baraita about Nechunia, the ditch dugger, that used to dig holes for water for the benefit of the others. And one day people come to him and say that his daughter fell into a ditch, into a cistern, and she's in danger. And he's telling them, no, she's fine. And after a while, he tells them, yeah, she got up of the cistern, and then really after a while, she came home. And people are asking him, how did you know? And are you a prophet? And he says, no, I'm not a prophet, but it's so clear to me that the things I make for others is not going to be the source of my distress. In other words, God is not going to punish me through killing my daughter in the ditches that I dig for others. But then, sadly, the Gemara continues, and I will share the sources. And Rabbi Acha is telling us, well, it's not that simple. Because says Rav Acha, although Nechunia ensured that others would have water, even so his son died of thirst. In other words, Rav Acha is telling us it's not that simple. If we think the world is working, in an obvious system, and we can understand why things happen and why things don't happen, especially tragedies, especially bad things, then he says, well, look at this example of his son. That did not help. This did not save his son. And the pasuk, the verse that Rabbi Acha is using to describe the point he wants to make, is a pasuk from Psalms that says, and around him it storms mightily. And this teaches that the Holy One, blessed be he, is scrupulous with those around him. In other words, the people that are around God, the people that are closest to God, God is watching them very closely, and they cannot get along even with minor transgressions. And the interesting thing is that Rabbi Nechunia, and we don't know if it's the Nechunia, the ditch digger, or maybe it's a different character, but Rabbi Nechunia says the same idea may be learned from here, and he gives a different pasuk, a different verse from Psalm, and he's quoting the pasuk, a God dreaded in the great council of the holy ones and feared by all those that surround him. And maybe we will get to that, we will get to the pshat, but maybe what Rabbi Nechunia wants to say in this specific pasuk is that God is very careful, with those that surrounds him, because they understand more than anyone else the greatness of God and the ways of God, and that's why God expects highly from them more than others. There's a very interesting addition to that in Talmud Yerushalmi, in the Jerusalem Bible, in Masechet Beitzah, and there our same Rabbi Acha is saying, it is written, his surrounding are very hairy. He is exact with them like a hair width. And Rabbi Yossi said, not because of this reason, but because what is written, he is awesome on his surrounding. His fear on those near him is greater than those far away. In other words, Rabbi Acha here is quoting a midrash that we're all familiar with, that God, Elohim medakdek im tzadikim kechut ha'se'ara. In other words, like God is measuring the way that the righteous people, the people that are closest to him, what they're doing, and he exact with them, like a hair's width. But what Rav Yossi is saying, he's saying it's what between God and the closest people to him, the people that are really understand the mightiness of God. It's the other way. Usually, a common person is not close to the king or to the prime minister or the president. They're far away from him. Only the one that work closely with him know him. But the people who are far away from a human authority fear most because they're far away, and they can just imagine how it is to be close to that person. But with God, the more people are closer to God, the more they understand the mighty, the greatness, the holiness of God. There's why they're even they're fearing God more than others. And now this concept of kechuta se'ara, like a hair's width, we know it from very various stories. For example, the story of Yosef, and the Midrash in Bereshit is saying, why did God make Yosef wait for 2 years in prison and not release him right away? It's because he told the minister, think of me yourself, not relying on God. In other words, instead of saying, I am a God-fearing person, I rely on God to release me, he put his trust on a person. And that's why God was very strict with him, and he stayed there for another 2 years. And the other very known example is the children of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu. God is Bikrovai Kadesh, amongst my nearest ones I will sanctify. And here again, the Midrash is quoting the pasuk that we saw in the Gemara. It storms around him fiercely, and it holds his servant to the highest standard. An interesting way of looking at it we find in the book of Ben Yehoyada, which is the book of Rabbi Yosef Chaim from Iraq, Baghdad, from the beginning of the 20th century, known famously as Ben Ish Chai. And Ben Ish Chai is telling us that that God is extremely strict with his devotees, and he brings the midrash, an explanation by Torat Chaim that explain our rabbis by saying the original divine concept was to create the world according to the attribute of judgment, midat adin, and so he treats them with the attribute of judgment according to the original divine concept. In other words, for simple people, God had to bring along the attribute of rachamim, of mercy. But with the righteous people, with the people that are closest, that are most devoted to God, there he deals with them as in the original plan, because this is what they would wish God to behave towards them. And the Reshit Chochmah, who is a mystic, a thinker, Jewish mystic thinker from the 16th century, he was the student of Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who is the teacher of Ha'ari, and Rabbi Eliyahu Davidash, that's the Reshit Chochmah. He says that Rabbi Chanina said it comes from here, a God greatly dreaded in the council of holy beings. That's the second pasuk, Na'aratz besod kedoshim rabba, that we heard from our Gemara. And he says, and Rabbi Chanina, it should be Rabbi Nechunya, is quoting that pasuk, held in awe by all around him, and he bring up them affliction in this world, so they will be pure in the next world. In other words, in the Kabbalistic view of Rabbi Eliyahu Davidash, the Reshit Chochmah, the reason why God is so strict with those around him is that they are getting all their din in this world. So when they get to the next world, they'll be pure, they have quiet, they wouldn't have to pay back anything. All these different thoughts are coming, as we saw, from the 2 verses in Psalms that the different Chachamim are quoting. And I think that in order to understand, to dig deeper, we have to look at the verses in Tehillim and try to understand, and we'll see that the pshat of those verses are also bringing us to another very interesting concept. So the first pasuk is, Yavo Eloheinu ve'al yicherash, esh lefanav tochel usvivav nis'ara me'od. Let our God come and not fail to act. Devouring fire preceded him. It stormed around him fiercely. And Rashi is saying about this pasuk, our God shall come and not be silent any longer concerning the split blood of his servants. In other words, Rashi is telling us this pasuk talks about all the Jewish people that are in distress, and their prayer is, please God, come and show us our mightiness. Dealing with our enemies like fire all around. There's a storm that God comes with his fierce because the spilled blood of his servants. So we see that even though the Gemara quoted that pasuk, when we look at this pasuk, we hear Rashi, and Rashi is telling us this is not just about tzaddikim or the servants of God, it's about the close people of God. This pasuk also expresses the desire, the prayer of the Jewish people, asking God, because we are your people, please, please come quickly and save us from our enemies, and be concerned with the split blood of your servants. The other pasuk that our Gemara quoted is El na'aratz besod kedoshim rabba venora al kol sevivav. God greatly dreaded in the council of holy beings, held in awe by all around him. And now this entire psalm in Pei Tet is really, actually, we understand from the context that this pasuk is talking about God in the company of angels. And Rashi indeed is saying, what is the great council of the holy ones? In the great council of the angels. But interestingly enough, we find in the book of Sha'arei Tshuva, Rabbeinu Yonah Migerondi, and Rav Yonah is telling us something very interesting, and he reminds us that to say that God is great, that God is great in the council around him, besod kedoshim rabbah, the council of holy beings, is not only being used to describe angels, it's also being used to describe the Jewish people. And says Rabbi Yonah in Sha'arei Tshuva, and now stand and reflect upon our great obligation to sanctify his name as the essence of that which God, may he be blessed, sanctified us with his Torah and his commandments, and separated us to be a people for him. For him was to sanctify him, to fear him. In other words, we are Am Kadosh, Am Kedoshim, and we are being asked to be Kedoshim ki Kadosh Ani. And the way that we are understanding our Kedusha is through Torah and mitzvot. And when we listen to the words of God, we are helping God, we are sanctifying God's name. And continues Rabbeinu Yonah, and he's saying, hence it is fit from the ones he is sanctified to be holy, in that even the vessels used to serve in front of God, may he be blessed, need to be sanctified. As it is stated, you shall not profane my holy name, that I may be sanctified in the midst of the Israelite people. I am the Lord who sanctified you. Now the vessels are the vessels of the holy temple, but also us as vessels, that we need to remember that God is the one that's calling us Adat Kedoshim. And that's why, and through the holiness of the commandments, when we sanctify God, may he be blessed, we are associated with the supernal holy ones that sanctify and venerate him, as it states, a God venerated in the great council of the holy beings. In other words, says Rabbeinu Yonah, it's not only the angels that are closest to God and they can glorify his name and understand his holiness. He also gave us that domain of getting close to God, understanding his holiness, and understanding our task in the world. And really, this is what we say every day in Tfilat Amidah. We are saying at the end of the section of Kedusha in Shmoneh Esrei, Ata Kadosh v'Shimcha Kadosh u'Kedoshim b'chol yom ya'alelu chasela. You are holy and your name is holy, and the holy beings praise you every day, forever you are an almighty king. And Kan, here, it's us. Kedoshim b'chol yom ya'alelu chasela, it's us saying Kedusha for God. In the Chazarat Hashatz, we'll have in Kedusha the angel who are saying that are sanctifying God. And in Shabbat, we will hear both the angel and the people of Israel together glorifying the name of God. As the closest we get to God, the closest we understand His mighty, and maybe the closest we can also stand in front of God and ask Him to redeem us from our distress, from our sorrow, from our sadness, and show His greatness in the world.